You're looking at one of the most beautiful places on Earth, Yellowstone National Park. But what if I told you this entire landscape, all 3,500 square miles of it, is basically the lid on a planetary-scale time bomb? Most people think of volcanoes as cone-shaped mountains, but the biggest threat on Earth doesn't look like a volcano at all. And the craziest part? The pressure is building, right now, under our feet. So what would really happen if it blew? The answer is way more terrifying and way more fascinating than you can imagine. Stick around because we're about to peel back the curtain on nature's biggest monster. All right, so let's get one thing straight. When we talk about Yellowstone erupting, we're not talking about some cute little mountain blowing its top like Mount St. Helens. That was a firecracker. Yellowstone is a supervolcano. The difference is like comparing a house cat to a saber-toothed tiger. A supervolcano doesn't have a cone. The whole ground is the volcano. You see, underneath the beautiful scenery of geysers and bison is a colossal chamber of magma, a hot spot in the Earth's mantle that's been chilling there for millions of years. So here's your first aha moment. Yellowstone isn't just a single volcano, it's the latest in a long chain of super eruptions. As the North American tectonic plate has slowly slid southwest over this hot spot, it's basically created a string of volcanic calderas, like a cosmic branding iron scarring the continent. Idaho Snake River Plain, that's Yellowstone's old path of destruction. This tells us the monster has a history, a very, very violent history. But if it's so big, why can't we see it? Well, because the last time it fully erupted, about 640,000 years ago, the explosion was so massive that the ground above the emptying magma chamber just collapsed. It created a massive crater, or caldera, that's 30 by 45 miles wide. The entire national park you see today is inside the volcano. Now, here's where it gets a little freaky. The ground at Yellowstone is alive. It breathes. Seriously. Scientists have measured the ground rising and falling, sometimes by several inches a year, as the magma sloshes around miles beneath. So we know it's active. That's a fact. But what does active actually mean? Does it mean it's about to blow? Well, the United States Geological Survey, or USGS, monitors Yellowstone 24/7. They track every earthquake, every ground swell, every change in gas emissions. They have it wired up like a patient in intensive care. And what they see are constant earthquake swarms, where hundreds of tiny quakes happen in a short period. This is the rock cracking and shifting under the strain. It's the sound of the giant stirring in his sleep. So the breadcrumbs are there, a violent past, a massive magma chamber, and a landscape that is constantly moving. We have the setup for the biggest natural disaster in human history. The question is no longer if it has the power, but what would happen when that power is finally unleashed. Look, we dive deep into crazy stuff like this all the time on this channel, trying to understand the science behind our world in a way that's, actually interesting. If you're into that and you want to support our mission to make science cool, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. It tells YouTube we're doing something right and helps us keep making these deep dives. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us. So the day comes. The ground swells beyond anything ever recorded. The earthquake swarms become one continuous roar. Then, boom. But this isn't an explosion that goes up. It goes out. The first thing that happens isn't lava. It's a pyroclastic flow. This is a superheated cloud of ash, rock, and gas. We're talking over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, blasting outwards at hundreds of miles per hour. It's not just a cloud, it's a solid wall of death that incinerates everything in its path. Anything within a 6,100-mile radius of Yellowstone? Gone. Instantly. Think Pompeii, but on the scale of a state. That's the immediate localized catastrophe, but that's just the opening act. The eruption would blast an unbelievable amount of material into the atmosphere. We're talking thousands of times more ash than Mount St. Helens. A thick, heavy blanket of volcanic ash would start falling across the country. Denver would get a foot of it, Chicago a few inches. Even cities on the coasts, like New York and Miami, would see a dusting. Now, you might be thinking, a little ash? I can deal with that. Oh, but it's not just dust. Volcanic ash is made of tiny, sharp fragments of rock and glass. It's abrasive, corrosive, and it conducts electricity when wet. Here's your next little dopamine hit of horror. A few inches of this stuff is heavy enough to collapse roofs. It clogs and destroys all combustion engines, cars, trucks, planes, everything. The power grid would fail as wet ash short-circuits transformers. It would contaminate most freshwater sources, making it undrinkable. Within days, the United States would be plunged into a transportation and communication nightmare. The country would effectively be split in two, with a massive dead zone in the middle. But the real showstopper isn't the ash on the ground, it's the ash in the sky. The eruption would eject millions of tons of sulfur dioxide and other gases high into the stratosphere. These gases mix with water vapor to form tiny sulfate aerosols. And here's the kicker. These aerosols are incredibly effective at reflecting sunlight back into space. This is the beginning of a volcanic winter. It's not an ice age, but it's the next worst thing. Global temperatures would plummet. Some models project an average drop of 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. That's about 9 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound like a lot, right? But it's a global average. In some regions, the temperature drop would be much more severe. Summer would just not happen. What does that mean for us? Global famine. The drop in temperature and sunlight would cause catastrophic crop failures worldwide. Major grain-producing regions like the American Midwest, Ukraine, and China would be devastated. The monsoon seasons in Asia, which billions of people depend on for agriculture, would likely fail. Food chains would collapse, both on land and in the oceans. It would be a fight for survival on a scale humanity has never seen. We've just gone from a national disaster to a global, species-threatening event. And it all started with a rumble in a beautiful park in Wyoming. Okay, take a breath. I know that was a lot. Global famine, the end of civilization. It's scary stuff. But now for the climax, the lesson, the part that actually matters for us right now. What are the actual odds of this happening? Well, according to the people who study this for a living, the USGS, the yearly probability of a Yellowstone super eruption is about 1 in 730,000. To put that in perspective, you have a much, much, much higher chance of being hit by a life-altering asteroid. So yes, it's a possibility, but it's not a probability that should keep you up at night. The thing is, Yellowstone doesn't operate on a human schedule. The last 3 big eruptions were roughly 2.1 million, 1.3 million, and 640,000 years ago. You see the pattern? The time between them is getting longer, not shorter. There is absolutely no evidence that it is due for an eruption. That's the total myth. That's just not how geology works. The most likely future eruption at Yellowstone isn't a super eruption at all. It would be a much smaller hydrothermal eruption, basically a giant geyser explosion or a lava flow. These would be serious local events for sure, but they wouldn't threaten the planet. In fact, lava flows have happened dozens of times since the last super eruption without triggering the big one. The real lesson here isn't to live in fear of Yellowstone. The lesson is about perspective. We live on the thin, fragile crust of a planet that is incredibly powerful and dynamic. Forces that are completely beyond our control are at work beneath our feet. We can't stop it, but we can understand it. Thanks to the tireless work of scientists, we would likely have weeks, months, or even years of warning before a major eruption. We wouldn't be caught completely by surprise. Yellowstone isn't a monster waiting to kill us. It's a geological wonder that reveals the awesome, terrifying, and beautiful power of the planet we call home. It's a reminder that we are just temporary residents on a world that operates on a timescale we can't barely comprehend. And honestly, that's kind of amazing. What do you guys think? Is Yellowstone the ultimate threat or a misunderstood giant? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read as many as I can. If you learned something new today and enjoyed the video, give it a like and maybe share it with a friend who loves this kind of stuff. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next adventure into the science of, well, everything. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.